And the reason I'm telling you all this is because I don't think the approach of Dharma season 1 is going to work for the Menendez brothers stories. In my opinion, what this show should have been is way more in line with American Crime Story, The People vs. O.J. Simpson. So let me substantiate my opinion. Hi guys, welcome to the channel. So we recently got a date confirmation, a release date for Netflix's adaptation, Netflix's dramatization of the Menendez brothers story, the Lyle and Eric Menendez brothers story. And this is under their kind of franchise monster that started with Dharma. So this one is called Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story. And I want to talk about why I'm nervous for the show adaptation, why I'm nervous for the discourse around it, because already this show's existence is proving challenging and the discourse is already getting out of hand. So I want to talk about what I think the show should be, what I predict the discourse will be, why I have problems with certain parts of that discourse, and just kind of predict the bumpy ride we are in for when this show comes out. Because I actually quite liked season 1. I actually quite enjoyed Dharma. Spoiler alert for this channel, but my next video is going to be a deep dive into the Dharma series. But because this teaser dropped, this has kind of jumped my schedule. But I was actually pleasantly surprised with, for the most part, how the Dharma series was handled. I heard a lot of negative talk about it going into it. So I was expecting something a lot more distasteful and sensationalist. And for most of the show, for about 8 of 10 episodes, I thought we got a surprisingly sophisticated and classy retelling. And yes, of course, some things were going to be dramatized and changed. But all in all, I thought it could have been a lot worse. The issue with the Menendez brothers adaptation from the jump is that this case is very contentious, all right? With Dharma, we can all kind of agree that Dharma was a massive piece of shit. I hope so, right? I hope people that I'm talking to right now can agree with me that Dharma was actually a monster, right? Yes, maybe there is some empathy you can have for him for his upbringing and some understanding you can apply to him due to certain things that happened in his childhood. But by the end of the series, I think we all agree Dharma was a monster. The title fits his name. Whereas with the Lyle and Eric Menendez brothers, there is a substantial part of society, a substantial part of the internet that believes these boys, these men should be free. They should be walking the streets. They should not be in jail. And I think the fact that this show is coming out with the title Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, is already ruffling feathers. You can already see the comment section is kind of furious. And it is all young TikTok people who are then going to be the main audience for this show, whether intentionally or not. All right, while gathering like videos for this video, I found a bunch of thirst traps of the Menendez brothers boys, which I just think is insane. Like, even if you think they are victims, right, and were just kind of like having reactive abuse towards their parents, making thirst traps from the footage of their testimonies where they were talking about this horrific abuse that you believe to be true is fucking insane. Like, watch this shit. I'll never love you. Now, let's just talk about the case quickly for those of you who don't know. Now, this is going to be a very SparkNotes version of the case, because really what I'm interested in talking about today is what I want as an adaptation, what I want from this show, what I think it should be. So just quickly, there was a really affluent family called the Menendez family. The father, the patriarch of the family, was involved in record production. He worked in the music industry, and one night, the 2 sons of this family, they burst into the living room with shotguns and murdered both their parents in a very violent and brutal fashion. Now, they actually got away with this initially. They quickly rushed off to the movies and saw Batman, and then got home and, you know, basically pretended that they walked in on the crime scene, and the police actually believed it to be gang-related violence. And then a few months later, one of the brothers actually confessed to their therapist that they murdered their parents. Then through a series of very convoluted events involving the therapist and a mistress he was sleeping with. Eventually, this tape recording of their confession came out, and the boys were charged with the murder of their parents. And initially, this felt like a very cut and dry case. The boys murdered their parents in cold blood, and then they went off on a spending spree with their inheritance and bought condos and expensive tennis lessons and cars and all this stuff, right? Like, it was insane. But then where this case gets really complicated, twisty, and complex is basically their defense. So their defense team comes out and says, you know what, we're not going to argue whether or not these boys murdered their parents. They did. What we are going to argue is this is actually a case of imperfect self-defense. And the reason it is a case of imperfect self-defense is we believe that these boys were being abused by their father in all manners of ways, including sexual, for years. Basically their whole childhood. Very brutal abuse. And the boys actually go into extensive detail about this abuse. And this is why the case is so complicated, because eventually they were actually found guilty for murder. They didn't get what the defense team wanted, which is being convicted for imperfect self-defense / manslaughter. They got the full murder conviction.
Imperfect self-defense is when you can't qualify for perfect because you're missing a required element for perfect, usually because you're missing reasonableness, objective reasonableness. And it has a similar effect of mitigating the offense. You don't get acquitted because it's not a perfect defense, but you can mitigate your criminal liability under imperfect self-defense.
And the reason this case is so controversial is because, in my opinion, any direction you look feels substantiated. There is a fantastic Fox documentary that came out a couple years ago after this case blew up on TikTok, and anyone who talks makes a really compelling case as to why their side is real. They have interviews with the prosecution lawyer, and if you listen to her talk, she's making so many statements where you go, that makes sense, that makes sense. Yeah, of course they probably just wanted money, and this is a cock and bull story, of course. But then when you listen to the boys talk, when you listen to their lawyer talk, when you listen to jurors talk who believe the boys and see their testimony in court, you can't help but feel compelled by the evidence, by their stories. There are multiple witnesses who actually confirm that, yeah, there were signs of abuse here. We heard of it. There were whispers about this for years, well before the murder happened. And it's a really tricky case, in my opinion. Now, I understand that most of the internet really does want these boys free, really does believe their story, but it's really hard for me, because every time I watch this story, there's so much that supports the idea that they were just after money and they did just kill their parents in cold blood, but there's also so much that substantiates the idea of abuse. And I think the issue with the discourse already is you kind of have to be on one side or the other. I'm noticing on TikTok already, people are either 100% these boys are dirty, filthy liars and deserve what they got, or people are taking the stance of, oh no, they should 100% be free. They shouldn't even be in jail. And in my opinion, the answer kind of falls somewhere in between. I really do resonate with this comedian's bit on a podcast where he talks about the fact that, something must have not been right in that house for both brothers to mutually agree to murder their parents. Not just one decided to do it. Both of them decided to do it, got on board and went, yeah, fuck yeah, next Tuesday.
Why would your kids think it was a good idea to murder you with a shotgun if you never did anything to them? And I have twins. And if my daughter walked into my son's bedroom and said, I'm thinking about killing mom and dad on Sunday, and my son said, this Sunday or next Sunday, chances are it was a pretty bad dad. It's like, what's the motivation? To have them both agree on it, that seemed like dad must have really have done something to them that made them both get on the same page.
Seems like the greatest crime against nature there is. Killing your own parents, right?
Well, maybe the first greatest crime is...
And that's a really interesting viewpoint, because it's like, what goes so wrong in a house that those boys are willing to do that? But on top of that, their behavior after the murder is strange. The insane spending spree they went on is bizarre. On top of that, you also find out that in their past, both of them actually robbed one of their girlfriend's houses for over $100,000 worth of stuff. So it's like all of this stuff keeps coming out in the case in either direction where you're like, I just don't know how to feel. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because I don't think the approach of Dharma Season 1 is going to work for the Menendez brothers' stories. In my opinion, what this show should have been is way more in line with American Crime Story, The People vs. O.J. Simpson. So let me substantiate my opinion. The reason I say this is because even though both are Ryan Murphy productions, there is a great stark difference between the way the OJ show was presented and the way the Dahmer show was presented. In the OJ show, yes, obviously, we all kind of have the vibe that OJ did that shit, all right? Most people, 95% of people you meet will say, yeah, OJ got away with murder. However, that show is very factual, very by the book. It is a court procedural through and through, and it gives you both sides of the story at every turn. And if you want to believe that OJ is innocent, you can substantiate that in the show. But on top of that, you do actually get the prosecution side. You get a really sort of like comprehensive, thorough idea as to why everyone felt the way they did during that case and every single moving part. Whereas in Dahmer, we are obviously working on the idea that Dahmer did all that shit 100%. He isn't denying it. No one's really denying it. And instead, we're getting this sort of like fly on the wall kind of making of a monster type of show. It's very voyeuristic. It's very like, this is a monster. This is an evil, evil guy. American Crime Story, O.J. Simpson versus the People, or whatever it's called, is not kind of interested in the mythology of O.J. Simpson. You don't get a dramatic recreation of him murdering Nicole Brown Simpson, obviously because it wasn't proven in court, but also you don't even get dramatic recreations of things that were proven, like Johnny Cochran's abuse of his partner, like O.J. Simpson's abuse of Nicole Brown Simpson during their relationship. You don't actually even get to see their relationship. You just see basically from the moment the crime scene is discovered until he is eventually found not guilty. You know, and my issue is if I was seen in the room with Ryan Murphy and you gave me on a platter the Lyle and Eric Menendez story and you said, which franchise is this going to go into? I would say American Crime Story, 100%. And the reason I say that is because we have hours upon hours of court TV recordings of the Lyle and Eric Menendez story. The reason this kind of trial had a second life on TikTok is because you can find basically the whole thing. You can find their super compelling stories about the abuse that they suffered at the hands of their father. You can watch hours of heartbreaking testimony. Similar to what you could do with the OJ case. You can find so much footage of the actual OJ court trial. So I just don't know why the show is falling under the Monsters moniker. And obviously that's going to ruffle some feathers because most of the comment section is sitting there and saying that they're praying that this is a bait and switch and the true monsters are the parents of the Menendez brothers. What they are hoping for is that this is a little sneaky misdirect, right? It's Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, but the true monsters are the parents that were abusing him. And my issue with that idea, my issue with a bunch of people going into the show with this expectation that this is the bait and switch that is going to be pulled off is, unfortunately, these boys were found guilty in the court of law. And that does need to be taken seriously. And yes, I do hear you. I understand that it is really suspicious that the initial trial resulted in a hung jury, and then the second trial, they didn't allow a bunch of the allegations against the parents into the courtroom. That does feel a bit rigged. That does feel a bit unfair. I guess the big issue is, depending on where you sit, there is either a small chance or a very good chance that these boys were lying about the abuse in order to get a lesser sentence. And if that is the case, and they did just murder their parents in cold blood, and these parents were never these evil villains to them, it's kind of an awful look if Ryan Murphy makes a show painting the parents out as these sexually deviant, awful, just monstrous people. If that wasn't proven in a court of law, I think this show is going to have a really big kind of mountain to climb in order to navigate this in a way, you know, that satisfies an audience that believes in the court system, believes in, you know, what a jury says goes, and then the people that believe justice wasn't done and believe the Lyle and Eric Menendez story. And that's why I just feel like, yeah, the American Crime Story approach of like kind of seeing both sides and just make it a courtroom drama is the way better idea. Unless the only thing you're going to dramatize is the actual murder itself when they burst into the living room and shoot their parents, which isn't up for debate on either side, whether it's prosecution or defense. Both parties agree that did happen. It's just the why of it. That's the only part that you're really going to get that sort of monster vibe from, that sort of dramatic retelling. Because I don't think you're going to be able to do a dramatic retelling of abuse that may or may not have happened without kind of upsetting either side of the belief system of the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, in my opinion. Like, I'm really hoping what they go for is, like, you know, when those like end title cards pop up and it tells you where people are now and what interesting new information came out, you're sort of like, ooh, I don't know how to feel about that development. Ooh, I don't know how to feel about that. Ooh, geez, what a complicated case this is. I know a lot of people are probably wanting to comment, oh, well, actually, you know, a lot of people did actually testify that there was abuse that they heard of, that was spoken about, that happened to these boys outside of what the boys were claiming, and maybe they could substantiate and dramatize that a bit, but I still do think there's going to be this air of, what if these people were paid off to, you know, help Lyle and Eric Menendez? What if this stuff wasn't true in court because it was never proven? I think it's going to be a really tricky adaptation unless this whole thing is a bait and switch and we get a courtroom drama. The reason I'm nervous for the discourse around this show and then the kind of renewed discourse that's going to come about the case, the reason I'm nervous for that is because a lot of the Lyle and Eric Menendez supporters genuinely believe that these boys shouldn't even be in jail at all. So they don't just believe in the imperfect self-defense defense or the manslaughter defense. They actually believe these boys shouldn't even be locked away at all, and it is a complete miscarriage of justice that they are in prison or jail at all. And that is where I have to disagree slightly. Hear me out here. Let me give you an example to kind of substantiate my opinion, right? In Jeffrey Dahmer, yeah, at the end of the Dahmer series, eventually an inmate kills Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, this obviously happened in real life, right? But in the show, it kind of goes to great lengths to sort of show the thought process behind that, why he was driven to kill Jeffrey Dahmer, because he was so shocked by what Jeffrey Dahmer had done, and to him it felt like revenge. It felt like justice for the victims. As he is killing Dahmer, he's saying, you know, you're going to suffer because of what you did to these people. And as an audience, you are sort of meant to be sitting there going, yes, this is true justice. This is what is deserved due to Dahmer being such a monster. However, that guy still did get charged for murder of Jeffrey Dahmer. You know what I mean? He still did something wrong, even if morally we can get behind it. The reason I say all this is, let's say every single thing Lyle and Eric Menendez said in court is true. Do I have many moral issues with them killing their parents after that if everything they said was true? No, because what they said was fucking horrific. Like, it was absolutely awful. Even if they wanted to murder their parents for money, even if they're like, our dad raised us just to be his abuse slave and just be tortured and corrupted by him for years on end, so we're going to kill him and take his money. As an individual, I'm not super morally angry at them. Do I think they'll reoffend on that logic? Not really. And I mean, like, that's a pretty shitty thing for the parents to do. If they want to do that and try to get away with it, go nuts. The issue is they didn't get away with it. All right. It's the same thing of, like, you know, if someone is awful to you and abuses you and you steal their money or something, like, I'm not going to be super angry about it. But if you get caught for theft, you will get punished. And the thing is, they got caught. They did get caught and they did do something wrong. In a society, this is not how you handle your issues. You know, both can be true. There is a good chance that the abuse against these boys did happen. But I don't know if the answer is 27 shotgun shots to both of your parents, including the wife, who they also claimed in court was getting physically abused by their father. So even if you want to go with the line of thinking that the mother was complicit and, you know, wasn't doing right by them and was like enabling what was happening to them, they still did murder their mum, you know, who you also could argue was under control and being manipulated by this evil father. So if everything they said is true, I don't morally hate them, but that doesn't mean they should be out on the street. It's an understandable crime, but it's still a crime. And even if you change it to imperfect self-defense or manslaughter, they still should have been in jail. This isn't something like Outcry, where they've actually been falsely accused and falsely convicted, and, you know, the country or the state should be paying them, you know, money to make up for it. There is probably a line between doing nothing about your abuse and shotgunning both your parents to the point where you have to go outside, reload, and go back in and then pin it on gang members, in my opinion. The reason I've done this video, the reason I've said all of this is because, yeah, I really do think in order to navigate this really complicated discourse, and the fact that most people look at this case either thinking the boy should be free, or at least look at the case with some conflicting feelings of like, I actually don't know how to feel. That's where I stand. Any direction I look, I don't know how to feel, and I start believing different sides. I think, yeah, the show really needs to go for an O.J. Simpson type show, you know, where you don't dramatize things that aren't confirmed. The main strength of American Crime Story is it's pretty factually accurate, and they do actually stick to a lot of stuff that did happen, and they don't dramatize things that people can't confirm. There is one section where Marsha kind of like speculates on what people that believe O.J. is innocent could actually think, and that is framed as like a fantasy. But aside from that, everything is factual and as it happened. Whereas with Dahmer, things were dramatized for a more compelling show. You know, in real life, Jeffrey Dahmer didn't have this long relationship with Anthony Hughes that was romantic and kind of could have, you know, changed him and put him on a better path. That was for the show. On top of that, Glenda Cleveland didn't even live in the building. She was actually like next door or a while away, but she called a few times. And Glenda Cleveland in the show became this kind of manifestation of a bunch of people's different stories who lived in the apartment complex. And the reason I say this, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I do not think this sort of like fictionalized dramatization approach is a good idea for the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, because people are going to be really pissed at any version you choose. If you start dramatizing the abuse, right? If you start dramatizing the parents, you know, like kind of violating their children, I think there are going to be a lot of people that are really angry. You know, stuff that was never proven is being dramatized and kind of assassinating the character of these parents. But on top of that, if you go the other direction and you dramatize Lyle and Eric Menendez as the true monsters of these show, these just like unstoppable, bloodthirsty kids, the way the media kind of looked at them initially, I think that's really going to rub people the wrong way, and they're really not going to be happy either. But I am nervous for how this show is going to go. I think they'll do a good job, but I think no matter how they do it, they are going to upset a lot of people. I think even if they take my suggested approach of doing the fly on the wall, OJ type show, both sides, just, you know, objective fact courtroom drama, there's going to be a lot of Lyle and Eric Menendez supporters that are pissed that their version, their true story, quote unquote, is not being told. And I don't think this show is problematic in its existence. I am not making the argument that this show shouldn't exist. I'm actually looking forward to it. I just think the comment sections I've seen on the teasers and TikToks and stuff like that so far, I'm nervous. I think we've got a storm coming. I am predicting that in this video. Timestamp me, quote me. It is going to be an absolute mess when this show drops. There's going to be people talking about the fact that we don't take male victims seriously. It's going to get real fucking messy. Part of me is curious and almost interested in how it's going to go, but the other part of me is really just looking forward to watching the show, and I'm kind of dreading the really complicated and chaotic discourse that's going to come from a lot of people who don't want to look at both sides and just want to bury their head in the sand in either direction and chew out the other party for saying anything that conflicts with their idea of the case. There were initially these like straight to TV productions that framed them as just like evil rich kids that just want to off their parents and run off and do a spending spree, and then eventually got caught. And then a while later, I think it was Law and Order SVU did like a special or something where they recreated it, but a lot more nuanced and a lot more sort of exploring the abuse angle. So I would be curious to see whether they kind of merge those two ideas and how that goes. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know what you'd like me to talk about next. I will be talking about Dahmer next. I hope I covered everything. It's just these are my general concerns about the Lyle and Eric Menendez adaptation. If you enjoyed this video, thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day.